My name is Rachel K. Dawson, and I spend 40 hours a week as a risk management director, calculating exactly how much a catastrophe will cost before it actually happens. In my world, everything has a price tag, a probability, and a legal exit strategy. I applied that same clinical logic to my family for a decade, quietly subsidizing their failures while pretending it was love. I was the person who ensured everyone was covered. Until the day I realized I was the only one paying the premium for a policy that offered me zero protection. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a sea of imported lilies and gold leaf menus. A $75,000 production that I had personally underwritten with a series of wire transfers. Ashley, my younger sister, stood in the center of the room in a custom lace gown, glowing with the kind of entitlement that only my money could buy. I was holding my 7-year-old son, Leo, by the hand, looking for our names among the crystal centerpieces at the head table. I found them eventually, but not where a primary benefactor belongs. Our place cards were propped up on a wobbly plastic folding table shoved against the service entrance, right next to the clattering bus bins and the heavy swing doors of the kitchen. Ashley approached us, her silk train sweeping the floor as she adjusted her tiara with a sharp, practiced smile. "Oh, Rachel, you found your spot," she said, her voice dripping with a calculated sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. I gestured to the cramped corner, the lack of a tablecloth, and the industrial speakers looming over Leo's head. "Is this a mistake?" "Ashley, I am the one who signed the catering contract for $32,000, I reminded her, my voice dropping into the low, dangerous tone I use for board meetings. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in close enough for me to smell her expensive champagne. "Chilamangambao hiemma. Chihio veruiro mafaihong, kontrai chikwa hiudong. Angoide, cho Antoine chokabuele," she whispered, patting Leo's head like he was a stray dog. Tyler, her new husband, stepped up behind her and adjusted his tuxedo jacket, looking every bit the failed real estate agent he was. "Don't make a scene, Rachel. It's a tight floor plan and we had to prioritize the VIPs and my kids," he said, gesturing to his own children who were currently tearing apart bread rolls at the primary table. I looked at the head table where our parents sat, their heads bowed as they studiously avoided my gaze, knowing exactly who had paid for the steak they were about to eat. "You chose to treat your only sister like an inconvenient vendor at an event she funded," I said, the realization settling in my chest with the cold finality of a closed claim. Ashley just shrugged, her eyes already scanning the room for a camera. Mine are already seated at the front, and they look perfect in the photos. "So just sit down or leave. I have a wedding to run," she snapped before turning her back on me. I didn't scream, and I didn't pull her hair. I simply reached into my clutch and pulled out a plain white envelope. I walked over to the gift table and set it down. A mere $500 inside. A deliberate insult compared to the $12,000 ski trip I had planned for the family next month. I took Leo's hand and turned toward the exit, my mind already running the numbers on how quickly a life collapses when the foundation stops paying the bills. "Let's go, Leo. We're going to a place where we're allowed to be loud," I told him as we walked out, leaving the $75,000 party behind without a single backward glance. By the time Leo and I reached our apartment, my phone was already vibrating with the rhythmic aggression of a family, realizing the ATM had left the building. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened the dashboard for my personal finances. A spreadsheet that mapped out the $140,000 I spent annually on people who couldn't even find me a tablecloth. My mother's name flashed on the screen first, and I answered just to hear the sound of a panic she didn't yet realize was permanent. "Rachel, your father and I are sitting here at the reception in shock because your sister says you walked out over a seating chart," she began, her voice brittle with the familiar strain of choosing the wrong daughter. I leaned back in my chair, watching the cursor blink on my screen as I hovered over the $15,000 non-refundable Turks and Caicos reservation. It wasn't a seating chart, Mom. It was a diagnostic test for the family. And everyone failed, I said, clicking the cancel button with a finality that made my chest feel light for the first time in years. Before she could respond, a text from my father popped up in the family group chat, demanding I return to apologize for embarrassing them in front of Tyler's parents. This is ridiculous. Rachel, you are upsetting everyone and ruining a $75,000 night over something so minor, he typed, followed by a series of angry emojis that felt like a relic from a life I no longer recognized. I didn't type back. I simply opened the bank portal and looked at the $3,200 automatic transfer set for Ashley's rent, a payment I had been making since she decided she was too creative for a 9-to-5. Ashley's voice then came screaming through a voice memo, frantic and shrill. You think you can just take your ball and go home because you didn't like your view? Not to sound ungrateful. But I honestly didn't expect just $500 from you when you knew we were short for the honeymoon spa, she yelled, the sound of wedding music still thumping in the background of her recording. I hit the speakerphone icon on the next incoming call from Tyler, his voice sounding desperate beneath a veneer of false authority. Rachel, let's be adults here. Ashley is hysterical, and the honeymoon suite bill is due at checkout tomorrow, he said, as if my bank account was a communal well he had a right to drink from. I laughed. A sharp, metallic sound that stopped him mid-sentence. Tyler, you're an adult. So go find a credit card that isn't maxed out and pay for your own wedding night, I replied, my fingers already navigating to the insurance portal to begin removing them from the premium health coverage I provided. He let out a ragged breath, his tone shifting from demanding to manipulative in a heartbeat. You're really going to ruin a celebration of love because of your ego? You've always been the one who could afford to help. So just do your job and fix this, he pleaded. But I was already done listening to his script. I hung up on him and turned my attention back to the spreadsheet. Seeing the $1,800 I spent on their groceries and the $450 phone plan that kept their social media lives running. It's not my job to subsidize a family that treats my son like a risk factor. Tyler, I muttered to the empty room as I began the process of deauthorizing their devices from my accounts. My mother called back immediately, her tone shifting to a pathetic whine that usually worked on me. Rachel, think about the children. You're being financially vindictive over a misunderstanding, she cried. But I just watched the cancellation confirmed message pop up for the Caribbean trip. I'm not being vindictive. Mom, I'm just finally practicing the risk management I get paid for, I told her, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I closed my laptop and felt the silence of the apartment wrap around me. A quiet that cost exactly $0 and felt like $1 million. 48 hours after the wedding. The silence of my office was shattered by my receptionist announcing a frantic visitor who refused to leave. Tyler marched into the room, looking disheveled in a cheap suit, his face a mask of artificial outrage that didn't hide the sweat on his brow. Rachel, we just got a notification that the $3,200 rent payment for the apartment was declined by your bank, he barked, slamming his palm onto my desk as if gravity would make me comply. I didn't look up from the risk assessment report on my screen, letting the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. The payment wasn't declined. Tyler, it was never authorized because I closed the account, I said, finally meeting his eyes with a clinical coldness. He scoffed, pacing the length of my office while waving his phone in the air. You can't just stop paying in the middle of a month. We have a lease and Ashley is at home crying because the landlord is asking for the balance, he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his own incompetence. I leaned back, interlacing my fingers and watching him spiral like a bad investment. Actually, I can. Considering I was the sole guarantor on that lease, and I gave the leasing office my 30-day notice of withdrawal this morning. I explained, my tone as flat as a dial tone. Tyler stopped pacing, his eyes widening as the reality of his homelessness began to set in. You're an executive, Rachel. You make $250,000 a year, and you're really going to let your own sister get evicted over a seating chart? He hissed, leaning over my desk in a pathetic attempt at intimidation. I didn't blink. Instead, I pulled up the itemized list of expenses I had covered for them since they met. I'm letting a 30-year-old woman and her able-bodied husband face the consequences of their own choices. Tyler. Which is exactly what a responsible risk manager does, I replied, watching the blood drain from his face. The phone on my desk buzzed with an incoming call from Ashley, but I ignored it, letting it go to voicemail so Tyler could hear her frantic sobbing through the speaker. Rachel, please. The gas company is here, and they're saying the $185 bill hasn't been paid in 2 cycles. I can't live like this, she wailed in the recording, her voice echoing off the glass walls of my office. Tyler looked at the phone, then back at me, his desperation finally overriding his ego. Look, I'll admit the wedding seating was a mistake. We were stressed. Okay? Just pay the rent this one last time and we'll figure it out, he pleaded, his voice dropping to a low, pathetic whine. I shook my head, already opening the file to remove their names from my corporate family health plan. You've had 10 months to figure it out while I paid for your groceries and your car insurance, Tyler. So consider this your final notice, I said, standing up to signify the meeting was over. He let out a jagged laugh, his face contorting into a mask of pure malice. You think you're so powerful because you have the money, but you're going to be very lonely when the rest of the family hears about this, he threatened, backing toward the door. I walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline and feeling the immense weight of their dependency lifting off my shoulders. I'd rather be lonely in a house I pay for than surrounded by people who only love me for the $5,000 a month I spend on them, I told him, not even turning around to watch him leave. The door slammed so hard the glass rattled. But I was already on the phone with my lawyer to finalize the severance of all remaining legal ties. Is the car repossession scheduled for the morning? I asked my attorney, my voice steady and devoid of regret. Excellent. Make sure the towing company has the address for my parents' house as well, I added, ending the call and finally enjoying the absolute, expensive silence of my own life. The following morning, Ashley launched her digital offensive, posting a black and white photo of her weeping with a caption about how blood isn't always thicker than money. My phone erupted with notifications from mutual friends, but I was busy reviewing the itemized breakdown of the family cell phone plan I still controlled. I noticed a recurring $25 international roaming charge from a boutique hotel in Tulum that didn't match Ashley's wedding itinerary. So I pulled the metadata. Ashley, you might want to stop the live stream and check your shared cloud drive before you call me a monster again, I said when I finally picked up her 10th call, my voice echoing in my quiet kitchen. She let out a jagged sob, her influencer voice cracking under the pressure of a real crisis. You're trying to destroy my reputation because you're jealous of my happiness. Rachel. Everyone sees through you, she screamed, unaware that I was currently staring at photos of Tyler with her maid of honor that had been automatically backed up to the account I paid for. I didn't argue. I simply hit send on a curated folder of evidence and watched the little blue progress bar complete its journey to her inbox. I just sent you the receipts for the $4,500 business trip Tyler took last month, which was actually a romantic getaway on my corporate discount code, I said, leaning against the counter as the line went deathly silent. Ashley's breathing became shallow. A frantic, wheezing sound that signaled the collapse of her carefully constructed fantasy. This is a lie. You're faking this to get back at us for the wedding seating. You've always been manipulative, she shrieked, though I could hear the sound of her frantically clicking through the images in the background. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the final threads of my obligation to her vanity snap. Check the timestamps on the hotel bar bill. Ashley. He used the secondary card I gave you for emergencies to buy her jewelry, I added, my tone as flat as a foreclosure notice. A few hours later, my mother called, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and genuine terror as the secondary waves of the fallout hit their house. Rachel. The neighbors are watching a tow truck hook up the SUV in the driveway. You can't be serious about taking your father's car, she wailed, the sound of my father shouting in the distance punctuating her distress. I checked the GPS confirmation from the recovery service on my tablet. Seeing the vehicle was already moving toward the impound lot. That car is registered to my corporation, Mom. And since I'm no longer willing to cover the $800 monthly insurance and the $600 payment, it's being liquidated, I explained. Scrolling through the legal paperwork, she gasped, her voice dropping to a whisper of pure venom. You're leaving us with nothing over a petty disagreement. After everything we did to raise you? She hissed, the ultimate weapon in her arsenal of guilt. I laughed, a sharp sound devoid of any warmth, thinking of the $50,000 in loans I had forgiven over the last 3 years alone. You didn't raise a daughter, Mom. You raised a contingency plan. And the plan has just been canceled due to a breach of contract, I said before hanging up and blocking her number. By sunset, the family group chat was a graveyard of accusations and desperate pleas for the $3,200 rent money as Tyler and Ashley's domestic war went public. I watched a video Ashley posted of her throwing Tyler's clothes out of a second-story window. The same window I had paid the glass deposit on just 6 months ago. Risk identified. Risk mitigated, I whispered to the quiet room, clicking the final button to deactivate every shared streaming service and gym membership tied to my name. The digital lights of their world went out one by one, leaving them in the dark of a reality they had never bothered to afford. The final audit of my family's survival began on a Tuesday morning when the eviction notice was officially taped to Ashley's door. I sat in a quiet coffee shop across the street, watching through the window as a city marshal stood by while Tyler hauled a series of designer suitcases onto the sidewalk. My mother's name lit up my screen for the last time, her voice no longer angry, just hollowed out by the realization that the bank of Rachel was closed. Ashley is moving into our guest room, and Tyler has disappeared with what's left of the wedding cash. Is this really the legacy you wanted? She asked, her voice cracking as the background noise of my father arguing with a mover filtered through. I watched Ashley sit on a cardboard box and pull out her phone, likely to post another filtered tragedy for her dwindling followers. The legacy I wanted was a family that valued my son more than my ability to sign checks. Mom, but you all chose the checks, I said, hanging up before she could pivot back to her usual excuses. I met Tyler one last time at a diner near the courthouse, where he looked 10 years older and wore a suit that smelled of desperation and cheap cigarettes. He pushed a folder toward me, his hands shaking as he tried to maintain a shred of the bravado he'd used at the wedding. If you sign this affidavit saying the $15,000 Turks and Caicos trip was a business expense, I can get a tax credit to cover my legal fees for the divorce, he whispered, glancing around to see if anyone was listening. I didn't even open the folder. I just pushed it back toward him with a slow, deliberate movement of my index finger. I don't commit insurance fraud for strangers, Tyler. And as far as I'm concerned, you've been a stranger since you put my son at the service table, I told him, watching the last flicker of hope die in his eyes. He stood up, his chair screeching against the linoleum, and hissed, "You're a cold, heartless bitch, Rachel. You know that?" I smiled. A genuine, relaxed expression that seemed to infuriate him more than any insult. "I'm a risk manager, Tyler. And you're a liability I've finally written off," I replied, watching him walk out into the rain without an umbrella. The fallout was absolute. Ashley's lifestyle blog pivoted to a series of bitter posts about family betrayal that failed to gain traction because she was now posting from a basement apartment in our parents' house. My father had to take a part-time job as a security guard to cover the $1,200 mortgage gap my monthly allowance used to fill. I received a final email from Ashley. A long, rambling mess of demands for the $3,200 rent deposit she claimed I stole from her future. That money went toward Leo's private school tuition for next year. So consider it invested in a future that actually has potential, I wrote back, before hitting the permanent block button on her email address. The group chat was gone. The shared bills were settled. And the $140,000 annual drain on my life had been diverted into a high-yield savings account for the only person who actually loves me. I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, the silence no longer feeling like a void, but like a hard-won victory. My mother sent one last text through a new number, claiming I had destroyed the family for a petty seat at a table. I didn't respond with words. I simply sent a photo of the $75,000 wedding receipt and then deleted the contact forever. They didn't lose a sister or a daughter. They lost a service provider they had mistaken for a doormat. As the sun set over Chicago, I realized that the price of my freedom was exactly what I had been paying to keep them comfortable. The debt was settled. The account was closed. And for the first time in my life, I was finally operating at a profit. My name is Rachel K. Dawson. And I've learned that the most important risk to manage is the one you let sleep in the next room. 6 months later, the air in Sedona smells like sun-baked juniper and a kind of stillness that I didn't know existed while I was busy financing everyone else's chaos. Leo and I sit on the porch of a small cedar cabin, watching the red rocks glow under a sky that doesn't demand an explanation or a wire transfer. There are no frantic notifications. No $3,200 rent crises to solve. And no curated blog posts to ignore because I finally stopped looking for my reflection in the eyes of people who only saw me as a transaction. I spent years afraid that walking away would make me the villain of the story. But I've realized that being the villain in a toxic narrative is often the only way to become the hero of your own. Leo laughs as he chases a lizard across the dust, his voice loud and bright. And for the first time, I don't feel the urge to shush him or apologize for his existence. I didn't lose my family. I simply stopped paying for a front-row seat to my own depreciation. The $140,000 I used to spend on their comfort is now the price of my own peace. And it is the best investment I have ever made. Thank you for following my journey of reclaiming my worth and setting the boundaries that saved my life. If you have ever been the person who carries everyone else until you forget how to stand on your own, I hope this story reminds you that no is a complete sentence. Your peace is not a luxury. It is a necessity that no one else has the right to tax. Please subscribe to join our community and share your own stories of breaking free in the comments below. Your support means the world to me as we continue to choose truth over obligation. I will see you in the next story.